So thank you, Vic. Thank you all for showing up. And thank you for putting up with me because I have no idea what I'm doing. I have given a lot of talks. I have never given a talk as an author. I don't understand what it's about. Please be nice. I went yesterday, I went to a bunch of talks to see what authors did. And I told my wife what I had learned. I said, it's amazing. Everybody, all the authors, they're all upbeat, they're all smart, they're all insightful, they say all these profound things. And Pam listened and she said, yeah, good luck with that. So, be nice. I'm expected to read from my book, which strikes me as bizarre because, presumably you could read from my book, but I'll do that. The one thing that I'm not going to do, I just can't give a talk without slides. So I made some slides and you get to be subjected to the slides. And what I want to do is I want to tell you the story of Factor Man. But in order to do that, it is sort of a unique story, so I have to tell you a little bit about my story. So let me start with that. And I'll start when Vic Fleming looks at me. I think this is approximately what he sees. Vic's a pretty level-headed guy, and he sees the same thing that you see. I have a family. When my son looks at me, I believe, I'm not completely sure, I think he basically sees this. Sometimes he doesn't see that. When he doesn't see that, I believe he sees this. My daughter, I know, sees this. And she's right to, let me just tell you that sort of up front. I want to believe that my wife sees this. But from the perspective of an author, actually none of this matters. What matters is what I see. And let me just tell you, let me diffuse a little bit what Vic said. What I don't see is this. Okay, I will tell you, this is me. I am flying upside down. You can see the sun from above the tail. This is the plane that I built when my fiance dumped me. But that's not the story you're going to hear today, and this is not what I see when I look in the mirror. I don't see a stunt pilot. I don't see a magician. I don't see a businessman. I actually don't see any of the things Vic really mentioned. What I see, I think what I want to see, I don't actually get to see this, but what I want to see is this. Now, I don't know if you recognize this guy. This is Richard Feynman. He was the great physicist between Einstein and Hawking. A little bit better than Hawking, not quite as good as Einstein. I knew him. This is from about the time when I knew him. And when I look in the mirror, I see a scientist. And, pardon? Richard Feynman, F-E-Y-N-M-A-N. And he was a total cut-up. The guy was a riot. You can't tell looking at his picture, but it was great. And he made me want to be a scientist. Now, nobody apparently sees this. So nobody looks at me and sees an author. I don't look at myself in the mirror and see an author. When I decided I wanted to write Factor Man, I have a lawyer. I told my lawyer, I said, Bob, I want to write a novel. He said, don't write a novel. Scientists who try to write novels fail. And so don't get depressed. Please do buy the book. Bob has changed his mind. He's in the book. He's happy he's in the book. And he's actually told me that he wants Ben Stiller to play him in the movie. So he's completely invested in the book. I told my wife I wanted to write a book, and she basically said no. She said, you can only write a book if you sell a company, you're already too busy. And then I wrote the book anyway. That was a mistake, it turns out. But she didn't see an author. So what I want to do is I want to tell you today, really what I want to tell you is why I decided to write a book when all these people were busy telling me maybe not. And the reason is actually really simple, but it's an odd reason. The reason I wrote Factor Man is because I was scared. And what I want to do today is I want to tell you what I was scared of and why that made me write a book. And to explain that, I spent most of my professional life as a scientist, to the extent that I get to be a scientist, working on a single problem. And I want to tell you about that problem because that's the problem that sort of started Factorman. So, and the question I want to start by asking is, what's a really hard problem? So here, for example, this is the canonical hard problem. I don't know if you can see it from back there. There is a needle in this haystack. And I say, find a needle in a haystack. That's a really hard problem. Well, it turns out all sorts of people have expressed opinions about this. So Beryl Markham said the best way to find a needle in a haystack is to sit down. Well, what actually happens when you sit on a haystack? Nothing. Okay, if there were a needle in this haystack, they wouldn't mind, right? They're just sitting on the haystack. The haystack is not going to collapse underneath them and the needle magically rise to the surface and poke somebody. But it turns out that finding a needle in a haystack actually isn't that hard. There's modern technology that you can bring to bear, and finding a needle in a haystack is easy. So what are problems that are harder than that? And I'm just going to mention a few of them. There are lots of them, and after I mention my three, you will realize that you can go on and name a bunch more. So, for example, making a great movie is hard. And let me show you one of my favorite scenes from a truly great movie. Every time I see this, I've seen it 100 times, it brings tears to my eyes. So Casablanca was released in 1942. France was occupied. It came out a few weeks after the Allied invasion of North Africa. This is amazing. So making a great movie is a hard problem. Something a little bit less emotional, designing a new drug is a hard problem. So the miracles that modern medicine is capable of providing that save us all. So here's an example of that. It's cool because I can explain this. This is actually the HIV virus. It's purple. And the green thing is a protein. And the protein has been designed to be exactly the right shape. And it can latch on to the HIV virus here and here and here and mess it up. And all of the amazing retrovirals that made HIV something you can live with and instead of something you will always die from, they look like this. They mess up how HIV works. So that's a really hard problem. Another really hard problem is proving a theorem in mathematics, a hard theorem. There's one theorem which is perhaps the most famous. It was created, I think probably is the right word, by a French jurist named Pierre Fermat. And his statement was that there are no integers x, y, z, and n, all positive, with n bigger than 2, such that raise x to the nth power, multiply it by itself n times, add y to the nth power, and you get z to the nth power. You just can't do that. And he said, I have a truly remarkable proof, but it is too large to fit in the margin of the book I am notating. Everybody believes he didn't have a proof, and he really was saying that to tick off the British, which was the thing for a French jurist to do then. But it's so simple, and the proof is so hard, it took 350 years before Andrew Wiles actually proved that Fermat was right. And we all knew he was right. I tried, way too hard for me. We all knew he was right, but actually proving it was unbelievably difficult. So what I want to talk about is what these three problems are like, because they all actually have three properties in common that are incredibly important. First of all, we can recognize solutions when we see them, right? I show you Casablanca. You don't need me to explain that it's a great movie. Once I have the formula, I can figure out what shape it will be, I can figure out that it's the shape I'm looking for, and that it will mess up the AIDS virus. And once Andrew Wiles produced the proof of Fermat's last theorem, it was relatively easy to check it. I wouldn't want to check it, you wouldn't want to check it, but there were a whole bunch of mathematicians who appeared almost magically out of the woodwork, and they all checked it. So we can recognize solutions to these problems when we see them. That's one incredibly important quality. The second quality is for any one of these problems, there are people who are really good at it. There are people who just make good movies. And there are a lot of people who make terrible movies, but there's some people who just know how to make a good movie. Mozart knew how to compose brilliant music. Mathematicians, there are mathematicians who are really good at it. There are people who are really good at drug design. So all of these really hard problems, there are still people who are really good at solving them. And I'm going to get back in a minute to why that matters. So the question I want to ask, or the comment I want to make, there are no problems that are known to be hard for mankind as a whole. We actually can do, it seems, we can do anything. There are people who can solve problems, make movies, design drugs, all the other things that come up. And it turns out this is a question that you can actually formalize. And I believe it's actually the most important open question in science. And the question is, what if there were no really hard problems? There just aren't any. Anything that we're ever going to encounter, we can solve. And if you're willing to say, okay, what if there were no really hard problems? My next question is, what if there were a single algorithm, a single computer program, a single method that could solve everything? And the weird thing is, this actually isn't a question. People have looked at the first question for a long time, and the answer is, if there are no truly hard problems, there is a single method that can solve everything. That's guaranteed. People have actually proved that. I'm not going to explain the proof to you, but it's actually amazingly simple. Then a single algorithm can solve everything, and the question that I really want to ask is, what if you knew that algorithm? So it's easy to say, well, that would be amazing. I would cure world hunger, and you could. I would cure cancer, and you could. But you should also be incredibly scared, because you can also listen to every conversation the president is having. You can, whether you want to or not. Sorry, Susan. You can break every code. Anything that is anywhere on the internet, however it's encrypted, however it's hidden, you can find. So I think it's fairly safe to believe that if you knew that algorithm, there would be a lot of people who would be, let's just say, unhappy and not want that technology to come to light. That is the question I have been working on my entire professional life. Every 10 years, give or take, I think I found it. And the last time, which was about 5 years ago, I got way closer than ever before. So all the other times, I think I've found a path that will eventually lead there. But this time, I actually thought I had found it. So I went to my wife, and I said, I think I solved this. It's called P equals NP is the problem. I said, I think I've solved P equals NP. And she looked at me and said, yeah, that's fine. Good luck with that. And she says that a lot. And I didn't know what to do because I really thought I had solved it. So I figured, okay, I need a plan. I got to figure out how I'm going to do this. How am I going to, I don't want to just bury it under a rock. That's crazy. It's technology that's going to get out. Somebody else will eventually figure it out. I have to make it good for the world. But I want to make it good for the world, and I have two other goals. One is I don't want to get killed, which people are going to be enthusiastic about. And two is I want to make sure that this is so disruptive. I don't want society to get horribly disrupted. I need a plan that achieves both of those things. So I came up with a plan. And then I had to figure out if it was a good plan, or if it had some horrible hole. So I went back to Pam and I said, can I explain my plan? And she was like, not really. You've done this before and I'll wait 10 years till the next time. So I decided to write it up. So I wrote a book about a guy who solves this problem and he makes a plan and it's about what happens. And I wrote the book because I felt like I needed a plan. I actually knew I would say to myself, okay, one of two things is going to happen. Either you're going to be right, in which case it's really going to be good that you have a plan, or you're going to be wrong, but then you're going to have a book, so that's pretty cool too. So I wrote Factor Man about someone who is facing exactly this problem and how he decides to deal with it. So let me do what I'm supposed to do and read you a little bit from the beginning of the book, and then I'll try and answer whatever you ask. Werner Heisenberg was a physicist, born just as the 19th century ushered in the 20th. He made such significant contributions to physics that he won the 1932 Nobel Prize for creating the field of quantum mechanics. He had an uncertainty principle named after him. He figured out how stars worked. This last contribution has always struck a personal chord with me. Rumor has it that sometime shortly after Heisenberg figured this out, a friend commented to him one evening how beautiful the stars were. They are, Heisenberg is said to have replied, and I'm the only person in the world who knows why they look that way. I stared at my computer screen. This was my Heisenberg moment, I figured. My computer had two windows open. In one, numbers streamed by slowly. In the other, an email waited to be sent. 21 words that might change the world. All I had to do was click on send. But once those 21 words were out there, I could never get them back. So before clicking send, I thought about it. I thought about the science. I thought about Denise down at the barn working with the horses. Even after many years of marriage, they would always be her first love. If the email changed my life, it would change hers with it. I thought about our kids, no longer living at home and beginning to make their own way in the world. If I sent the message, they would be making their ways in a different world than they had explored yesterday. I thought about my plan. I wondered if my family and I would be safe. I wondered if I would indeed manage to deflect at least the worst of the disruption to which my technology might lead. And I thought about Heisenberg, about knowing something that only you know and that you know will change the world in ways you cannot predict. It took a generation for quantum mechanics to beget nuclear weapons, and longer still for the science to lead to a new and clean, albeit dangerous, energy source. My discovery, I suspected, would have as great and as unpredictable an impact, but far more quickly. I thought about science and the ethics of science. We scientists just do what we do and somehow trust that the things we discover will be used more for good than otherwise. It's never been clear that such optimism is justified, and no one ever gave us the moral authority to unleash our personal progress on the rest of the world. But we're scientists. We do what we do. I thought about Denise and the kids and the unknown consequences. I thought about the plan. I thought about Heisenberg. I thought about science. I hit send. So, thank you. There's a little bit of Factor Man, and any questions you have, I'll be delighted to answer.
We'll wait for the microphone. Thanks.
With Heisenberg, is not uncertainty what drives science? If you solve everything, what is the impetus thereafter?
So, That's a great question. To solve a problem, you have to formulate it. And I think that what drives science is the need to formulate difficult problems. So Einstein discovered relativity in large part because he asked himself, what would a man traveling at the speed of light see if he looked in a mirror? It is the questions that drive science. Once you have the right question, getting the answer turns out to be much easier. So having this algorithm, I don't think it doesn't finish science. It means we are much better when we have good questions. So if I ask, I have a budget of $17 billion and I need to get a ton of relief supplies to Haiti, what is the best way to do that? Asking the question is hard. It's politics. It's all sorts of trade-offs. But if I know that I want to ask the question, I would love to have the best possible answer as to how to spend my $17 billion. Did I answer you?
The follow-up would be, do people want to hear the answer?
So my answer to that is, I'm a scientist. That part isn't my job.
Pretty good answer. Any other questions? Yes, right here, David. No, that's okay.
I listened to an interview with you before I came because I wanted to know more about you. And
Was I good?
It was good.
Okay.
It was like a 15-minute radio show when you were up in Stanford at the Oxford Passage. Anyway, but one of the things you said, you were interested in finding a cure for cancer. Over 10 years ago in Northwest Arkansas, I heard a woman speak who had a PhD in cellular medicine from Harvard and a PhD in behavioral medicine at Harvard. And she had been working at Tufts University a long time before she did the behavioral medicine. And she said, we were so close to the cure for cancer. She said, we were just almost there. And so she was talking for the Komen Foundation. And one thing she said was then, you know, the business of cancer, you know, with hospitals and doctors and medicine, you know, overtook it. So I'm wondering, from a mathematical standpoint and a physics standpoint, what do you call that energy that stops progress?
A pain in the butt? Such energy obviously exists. And I think as a scientist, I try and get past it. There's a whole list of answers here. The P equals NP question, what I work on, it's like 19th century physics, where you can imagine one guy goes into his garage and he putters for 6 months and he comes out and the world is different. He has solved P equals NP or created Frankenstein's monster, or he's made the world different by himself in his garage. Hard to mess that guy up. Or you can have a team of 50 trying to cure cancer or trying to find the Higgs boson or doing these things that make science such a team sport that way these days. Much easier to mess them up. And there I think we work, we wait for society to realize the value of what we can potentially provide, and we hope that that day comes sooner as opposed to later. But scientists, by and large, are not politicians. We just...
In your book, you mentioned Austin as a location. I was just curious what your connection might be, or some of the other connections in the book that, you know, have a real personal value or meaning to you.
So I'm going to tell you guys a secret, but you can't tell anybody else. I don't think I'll get in trouble if you spread it around. Everyone in the book is real. Most everyone in the book. There's a Chinese assassin. She's obviously not real. But to the extent I could, I tried to imagine. Remember why I was writing this, right? I was imagining a world that was our world, but I had solved, somebody, happened to be me because it was easy, had solved P equals NP, and what are we going to do about it? So Bob Hasday, my lawyer, is in the book. There's a financier named Brian Finn. He's in the book. He's invested in all three of the companies I run. He's in the book. Everybody agreed to be in the book. There are actually 4 main characters. There's Factor Man, who you don't know his identity. There's Janet Liu, the Chinese assassin. There's an FBI agent named John Hudson, who is modeled after an FBI agent that I've known my whole life, named John something else. He asked me to change it. And there's a reporter. I'm answering your question. And there's a reporter who breaks the Factor Man story. And what I don't want you to tell anyone, that reporter is Oliver Rader, who came here a couple of years ago and talked to you all. And I know Oliver, and Oliver went to UT Austin. I used Oliver's backstory, and then I sent Oliver a copy and said, "Is this okay?" And he never responded. And he's come up to me and said, "I'm sorry." But I had to change it all. So I looked at it and said, okay, what can I change? And I tried to change Oliver's life. The guy in the book has a much more of an attitude than Oliver has because it's just better. But so instead of working for 538, the reporter now works for the New York Times. But Austin is so integrated into the book. And there's a complexity theorist named Scott Aronson. He's in the book. He's at UT Austin. I know him. I asked him, is it okay? Yes, it's okay. So I put him and UT Austin in the book. There is a coffee shop that's really in Austin that's in the book that I needed. But I just moved Oliver to the New York Times. And I think I made him sort of unrecognizable unless I confessed. And now that I've confessed, he probably horrible things can happen. Vic, if I need a judge, I'll get back to you. But he seemed okay with it. So that's why Austin was in the book, because a real person actually had roots there. And it was mostly Scott Aronson, but Oliver did go there as a graduate student. Most honest answer I can give you.
Right behind you here, Kathy. Wait for the microphone coming right at you.
I'm asking you this, not as a scientist, I'm not a scientist, I'm asking you as a scientist, if you feel there's any long-term impact as opposed to just kind of, this is part of the cycle, and the changes in the practice and the restrictions and the policies that are currently going on at the EPA?
So, I could have stopped you as a scientist. When you said, do you think there's any long-term impact? I could have said yes. I'm not going to make a political statement. But I believe as a scientist that, the ripples of what we do today echo throughout eternity, I think, to quote the Gladiator or something like that. But everything we do has long-term impact. Now, some of it's good, some of it's not good, and I don't want to say what's good and what's not good, but certainly how science is treated matters.
Questions? Any other questions? Well, I'll tell you what. Oh, we got one. Somebody have a hand? Oh, you can. Of course you can. You're selling books.
And it is about books. Do you read fiction? Along with
I try
what you
to.
do, and what do you like? And what authors do you?
I like thrillers, which is why I wrote a thriller. I think the person I like the most reliably is Michael Connelly. I read garbage. I just want to be completely upfront about this. I read garbage because I have enough hard stuff to do day to day. I think in terms of, the one thing, if I were to recommend something, my son introduced me to it's sort of very gentle fantasy, something called the King Killer Chronicles, which is just awesome. It's 3 books, and the first 2 are out, and the 3rd is being written, and it's unbelievably engaging. So that's something that I would point people to, because everybody's obviously heard of Michael Connelly. I like Lee Child. Susan and I were just exchanging authors' names last night, and I like garbage, but it's good. It's entertaining. That's what I'm doing it for.
Any other questions? Yes, sir. Yeah, we do. We got to record it. So we got live stream people, so we need you to do that.
Just real quick, you mentioned that coffee house is a real coffee house in Austin. Will you be willing to say which coffee house it is?
I think it's the Texas Coffee Traders or something like that. I don't remember. I can search for it on my computer and find it in no time. Or no, that's the wrong answer. Buy a copy of the book and you'll find out. See, I am so not an author.
But yes, Leanne, question right there.
How hard was it to find the publisher. What was that experience? Did
That-
an editor, what did they want to do to it?
So I have a terrible answer there. I don't have the patience. So I sent it to a couple of agents who said no. I sent it to a hybrid publisher who publishes science thrillers. She got all excited about it, and we agreed to work together. And there are some good things about being a computer scientist. She did such a good job that before she published it, I bought it back from her and published it myself. So I now, because I wanted to have all the rights. And it's really about marketing, and I can do whatever she could do. And she was going to just sort of get it out there, and I can get it out there. So I just, and she and I are buds, so it's not like she's annoyed that I did this. I talked to, this is actually a very complicated question. I talked to Pam, she of the Good Luck With That, and we talked about what the goal was now that I had written this book. Sort of, I wrote it totally on the sly. I would slink back to the office at home some evening and write for an hour and then come out. And it was like, what were you doing? Ah! And I would type away at work. Anyway, we don't care about the money. I do very well. I care about the story. We decided that if it's made into a movie, that would be awesome because it would be fun in a way that we just never get to have fun. Who does that? So I think I can pursue those goals as effectively as the woman at Science Thrillers Media can. So that's why I bought it back, so I could just be completely free. And maybe that will be a total mistake. I was guided in large measure by The Martian, which Andy Weir basically self-publishes a blog. And I figured I can do that, and maybe it'll get traction, maybe it won't. But the publisher is probably not going to be the reason it does or it doesn't. Having 2 copies in every bookstore in the country, that doesn't move me much. So I hope that's not a stupid answer, but that's the story.
It's not a stupid answer, and speaking of buying it back, you can buy this book and get Matt to sign it. Let's thank Matt Ginsberg for this.
Thank you so much.
And while he's signing books and visiting with you, you can ask any scientific question or crossword